This is a Let's Find Out with co-host Diego flashback episode.
Everything in this universe has a beginning. The Big Bang. The formation of nebular matter into stars and planets. The first collections of amino acids in the Earth's oceans. The first creatures to leave them. The first mammals. The first primates that walked upright. The first religion. The first printing press.
Pump up your space boots and phone home. It's time for Let's Find Out with co-host Diego.
Live. To tape from the mothership. It's Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. Bigfoot, UFOs, Stargates, Let's Find Out. Paranormal, intelligent design, entertainment, Let's Find Out. You're listening to Let's Find Out with co-host Diego.
On tonight's show, we continue to discuss one of my favorite topics, the legend of Bigfoot, and that legend is still going strong as of today. There are those that believe or suggest that Sasquatch could be a type of descendant of Neanderthal. It is known from both Native American legend and from folklore from settlers and hunters who have been experiencing this for hundreds of years. I met this gentleman a few weeks ago at the annual Virginia Squatch Fest in Wares Cave, Virginia. If that ever comes back, it's worth the drive. There's a lot of great people there, a lot of knowledge, a lot of great stories. Tonight's guest, he's the author of the book Off the Beaten Path, My Search for Sasquatch and Self. Please welcome Sasquatch researcher Curt Bradford. Curt, how are you, my friend?
Doing good. You're doing good, Diego.
Fantastic, man. And I'll tell you this now because I didn't tell you before. One of the reasons I went to the annual Virginia Squatch Fest is, first of all, I'd never been to anything like that before, so to me that was a great experience. Two, it's not something that I've seen a lot, at least not in Virginia. I know there's UFO conventions in other parts of the countries or this and that, but Virginia is really kind of an oddball thing. I've never been to a convention quite like this, but I tell you, I went there for a specific reason because I wanted to find people to share their story on the show. You were not there at the booth, but I saw a scientist autograph author here is where to autograph your book, and I was waiting. I was talking to the person at the booth. I said, well, it's author here. You just wait a few minutes. It's going to come back out. Okay, great. And so I purchased the book, and you came out, and we shook hands. We talked a little bit, but you're the first author that I've ever had sign any of my books. So that's kind of a big deal for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I know when people come to buy the books. I mean, I've gotten signatures from authors before. And sometimes, Diego, they screw up. They don't write your name. They don't spell your name right and everything. So every time I author, sign a book, I try to get the spelling right. And, hey, this is from, Curt Bradford. And because it is cool because you don't get the chance many times to meet folks who've written interesting books. And like you said earlier, I mean, if there's anything I don't know, I won't say anything or I'll just tell you I don't know it because in the book, everything I put in the book is true to my experience, and I just really tried to concentrate on being accurate and giving people the most correct information that I can come up with.
Yes, as I'm reading, you and I had a similar stomping grounds, in Virginia, places you lived. I lived in the same places too. Now with Sasquatch, and we talked earlier before the start of the show, I've never heard of stories of known much about Sasquatch activities in Virginia or DC metro area, but your journey did not start Bigfoot hunting in Virginia. It happened halfway across the United States. You moved to Oregon, right?
Yes, back in 2001.
Of course, we know that in the west of this country, now we're opening the can of worms because that's one of the main things in that side of the world is Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever other names people call it, but that's the hotbed of Bigfoot activity.
That's right.
So let's dive a little bit into that because I know you've also done some actual field work too. So let's talk about once you got to that part of the world and tell us about your experience.
Yeah. So basically, I represent an insurance. I represent Nationwide Insurance mostly. I've been with Nationwide since '98, and I work in King George County in the area called Dahlgren. It's outside the Dahlgren Naval Base. And so I worked for Nationwide there. But when I learned that they had a job opening, Diego, in Portland, Oregon, like the heart of the Northwest, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my chance to get out there. I'd always wanted to go to the Pacific Northwest after all like we were saying, all the books we've read from Oregon and Northern California, Washington State, British Columbia, Idaho, Montana. So it was just like I had this opportunity to move out there, get a job and be realistic because I had to pay my bills. I couldn't just go out there and squatch the whole time. So I mean, I basically threw everything I owned into an '87 Chevy Caprice and drove about 3,000 miles across the country to set up base camp for some Bigfoot expeditions. And it's funny. I mean, it's like a lot of people probably wouldn't do that. Just pick up and totally go to another area of the country. They know no one, and they know very little about except for the Bigfoot stories. And so it was just a chance for me to it was just a window I knew I would never have again, because I said to myself, I will kick myself if I do not, spend some of my life and go out there and try and figure out what's going on in the Pacific Northwest,
Right. So you get there, and then when did you finally drum up the energy to go out there? So I know I've read the books and I've talked to the people. It comes to a point where it's like, I think I need to do this on my own because I got to go out there and find out for myself.
Yep. And it's like really the books that I read, like by John Green and Grover Krantz and all kinds of different researchers that were out in the Pacific, Peter Byrne, I had just always wanted to go there. And I mean, it's an incredible place. I mean, if you pull out an atlas and look at the Northwest, I mean, it's just like, if you like the outdoors and you like looking for Bigfoot, it's like you're like a kid in a candy store. There's so many. It's a target-rich environment.
Right.
I didn't even know where to start, to be honest. But over time, I got to know a few people. I got to hang out with some of the folks who've been squatching up there, and so I really know a lot about like the Northwest folks. And I don't know as much about Virginia, but now I'm starting the process of learning what's going on in Virginia with the Bigfoot phenomenon. But yeah, I just had this window, and it's like it was my dream. And it's just like, if you got a dream and you can do it, just go do it. Don't wait. Get out there. Make it a priority. If you've got a dream, we're all running out of time. So I was like, I got to get out there. This is my time. And I was out there for 6 years. And the book is basically about those 6 years.
Right. And and we were talking about earlier before we started where Virginia is not known to have that. And you talked to some of the Native American population in Virginia and didn't really have to say much about it. But when you go out west, and I'll tell you, I read a book. It's one of my favorite books, and by the Lewis and Clark expedition and their journey. And while they were exploring, they came upon many different Native American tribes, some of them which I never heard of before. And while this subject's not in the book, but I do know that from reading and researching other people's work, that a lot of these tribes have one thing in common: is a lot of their folklore, there's always the subject of Sasquatch.
It's amazing. I mean, like we were talking about before we went on air, it was like every tribe has its own name, and they all have their own. They all look at it a little bit differently, but yeah, and these tribes, Diego, I mean, they've been out there for we're not talking 2,000 or 3,000 years. We're talking, several thousand, 7,000, 8,000 years that the tribes have been up there in the Northwest. So they know what they're talking. They know that land, they really knew that land and still do,
And they do. So did you, while you were out west, did you talk to some of those elders and leaders, and then did they give you a little bit of information about what it is that their ancestors saw?
I did talk to, there was one lady I talked with who was, she was a member of the Grand Ronde tribe. They've got a casino out there in coastal Oregon. And it's interesting, she was like the only person I tried to talk to other people, but it's kind of hard to line up conversations because most of the Native Americans who know about this, they pretty much there's not a lot of overlap between reservation life and my life in out in Portland by myself. So, but I anywhere I could find Native Americans who would talk, and it was interesting what she said. She was like, she's like, Curt, our tribe, has known about this for a long time, and she said it was interesting. She was like, and her tribe believed, like, if you have a dream about the Sasquatch, that it's good luck. And then other tribes will say things like, this was interesting. This was really interesting. They said, basically that, if once you see a Sasquatch, your soul never rests until you see one again. And there is a lot of truth to that, because the people who see these things, a lot of times they really don't, someone who's seen it for the first time, not anticipating it, not really knowing much about it, it's super scary. I mean, like one of the stories in the book, there was a lady driving in in the Cascade Range in Oregon at night in the mountains, and just this huge 8-foot tall creature runs across the road right in front of her car and just goes straight up the mountain and disappears into the night. I mean, can you imagine how scared that person was, And it's like, what was that? So then a lot of the folks, they would seek out people who, it's like, hey, tell me I'm not crazy. I just saw such and such. And then they'll listen to other people who've had encounters, and it's like, it's really weighs on them. If they can't tell someone, because it just changes your whole life once you see one of these things. It's like, if they can't, it's just hard. If you can't tell someone what you've seen and have to hold it in for so long, and you're afraid of being, made fun of, once you
Right.
go and share these stories and see other people with the exact same things happen to them or similar things, it's just like, it's a big relief. It's a huge weight off the, the person who's seen one. It's a huge weight off the shoulders,
Yes, and it's interesting because I know people always attribute these sightings to either A, one, they're lying, which is could be very possible because for the attention and make money. Two, they actually did see something, but they always say, well, they mistaken it for a bear. Brother, let me tell you, I've seen black bear 3 feet in front of me. Caught me by surprise. There's a vast difference between a creature that walks on both legs and a bear. And I know a grizzly can also walk on both legs, but you can't confuse a grizzly with a Bigfoot.
Mm-mm. And bears don't have a 5-foot stride.
No, he's not. So we talk about Bigfoot because I know the Bigfoot broke big in the 50s.
That's right.
And I believe it was turned by, and forgive me, there was a person who was working, what was it, a construction or stone quarry of some
Jerry
sort.
Crew. Jerry
And
Crew.
and from there, I think the legend in America just kind of exploded. It's just like in the 50s, I must say early stages, there was a gentleman, not Bigfoot related, but something similar. There's always one main person in every generation that's known for something. There was a gentleman called George Adamski at that time, and he was very big he was the ancient aliens guy for his time. And down the road, people attributed him being a hoaxer or a liar, but that's the chance you take when you report and investigate things like this. But going back to the main point, with people having enough eyewitnesses to where I don't think that they can say it's a bear or anything. But you tell me about some people's stories, what they told you, what they've seen. I know you told me that one story. I don't want to give away too much on the book, but what else can you tell us about someone else's experiences and how they described this creature?
Man, there's a lot. It's interesting. A lot of the folks, I mean, they're just, after you start reading account after account after account, you're absolutely right, Diego, because there's going to be a certain percentage all the time that are going to be fakes, or people, like you said, they want attention, But there's, given the thousands of encounters and sightings people have had, it's just interesting. You'll go talk to someone in the Northwest, and if you go and talk to 10 different people, maybe one person had heard about Bigfoot, but if they're friends and their relatives will have stories as well. I remember there was one lady, I just, out of the blue, she worked at the Oregon Trail Museum, and I said, hey, have you ever experienced a Bigfoot or anything? And she said no, but my husband did. So she started telling me it was out in Central Oregon near Bend, and they were out hunting. And so they were bow hunting. They were up in the tree stands, and they smelled something that was just like really awful, and they got really creeped out. So they got out of there, and just stuff like that, where I talk about in the book like skookum, where you basically, it's kind of a I don't know how to describe it. It's like just like an evil spirit, it's like what the Indians would describe it as. And so, I mean, I've experienced where I just get totally creeped out. And but anyway, yeah, so those hunters, they never saw anything, but the hair on their arms was standing, and they just got out of there. But there's other stories too. I mean, this was interesting, Diego. Like the Columbia Gorge separates like Oregon and Washington states. And so back in, I think this was in the 80s, this was really got a lot of attention. There was a Sasquatch that was running along the interstate there in the Columbia Gorge, running, and so this guy, I mean, he passed it and got a really good look at it. And he said it cut across the road. But the people who saw it, there was like 2 police officers who saw it because it was creating like a traffic hazard. And this was at night. And then, other, like about 5 other people saw it. So it's like, and then it jumped over the rail and went down toward the Columbia River. And it's like, why would like these, police officers say that they see this crazy 7-foot tall thing running parallel to the road and runs across the highway and goes down toward the Columbia. And so it's like sightings like that, it's like, why would these police officers risk their reputation? And why did 2 or 3 officers see it? And how come 6 other people saw it too? And so it was just a big deal. That was, a lot of people saw it, and it's validated, and all kinds of sightings like that. A lot of the people, most of the sightings really, Diego, they don't go reported. They don't read them in any book. Like there's this one guy who lived in Sweet Home, Oregon, and he had a farm out there, and he was in the woods, and he was just walking along through the forest, and all of a sudden this Sasquatch jumped down out of a tree with a baby in its arm. Probably, I'm guessing it was a female. I don't know, but he just froze, and they locked eyes, and like he was so scared that he never wants to go into the forest again. So these things get up in the trees too, and so they try and hide just like hunters do. If you go up in a tree stand, you're away from where you normally the animals would see you. They're not looking up. Well, the same thing happened here with this guy, and like and that's a lot of times, like, people are so scared they never go back into the woods again. Even people who love going in the woods, hunting or fishing or mining or whatever, they never want to go back. And it's like, that's the kind of effect this thing can have on people.
And that's what I was talking about earlier, because these people who are experienced outdoorsmen, they could be hunters or farmers, and they've had years of experience being out in the woods, but they're no longer willing to go back in there because obviously they saw something way out of the ordinary.
Exactly.
A kernel of evidence is right there to say, okay, there's a possibility that something's going on here. Because I'll say that I don't know who I spoke to before. He was like an amateur explorer. I asked him, so in your opinion, how much in the United States currently is a very populated country? But he says not really, because if you were to look at what's not populated right now in the United States, it basically outnumbers the cities that we have now. There's so much forest out there, so there's a possibility that there could be something there, because there's still land in this country where man hasn't set foot in yet, which is basically what I'm trying to get to.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. Like the 2 national forests that I focused on because they were close to Portland where I lived were the Mount Hood National Forest and then the Willamette National Forest, not too far from Portland. And so, I tell you, Diego, Mount Hood National Forest alone has 1 million acres. And then the Willamette National Forest is it's like 1.7 million acres. You could put like 2 Rhode Islands inside that one national forest, and there's like 10 other national forests besides that one in Oregon.
Wow.
So, and there's places, like you said, there are literally places where not even the Native Americans ever went. I was talking about Skookum. Sometimes the Indians like to stay in their area, and they let Bigfoot have his or her area. Let the family groups have their area. So, yeah. So, and there are fakes. There's one guy I was talking to who had put a fake story online. He was like, yeah, go to this website, Curt, and I'll show you this fake, claim I put in. And he said a Bigfoot had pushed a tree over into their fire at their campground. He was laughing about it. So, I've talked to people, he's basically admitting that it was just a fake story, but the emotional response that people have, Diego, it changes the rest of them for the rest of their life. And it's like, I studied psychology in college, and some of that like visceral response to having a Sasquatch sighting, it's hard to fake. There was a guy, his name is Matthew Johnson. He's a clinical psychologist out of Alaska. And he was down at the Oregon Caves National Monument in Oregon and in southwestern Oregon. And I've been to that place too. And he was hiking with his wife and 2 kids. And so he and his wife heard this, and they said, what is that? They thought maybe that's just my wife breathing heavy. We're going up these hills. And they keep hearing this. So the husband, now, okay, he was like 6'10". He used to play. He played in college. He played against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in college. This guy is huge. I got to meet him, and what he did is he went higher on the trail and looked down, and there was a Sasquatch male that had been tracking had basically been tracking them, and so he saw it peek from behind this big tree, and it looked down the trail to his wife and kids. And it just like, he had this feeling, and so this guy's a clinical psychologist. He deals with all kinds of people having emotional issues. And so he was recanting the story at one of the Bigfoot conventions in Portland, and he started to cry. He said, I knew that if it tried to attack my family, there was nothing that I could do about it. And he just kind of wept like a kid might, and those things are kind of hard to fake. And if I wanted to fake emotions, I don't know if I'd be wanting to, cry in front of people. And so, it was just like he had more to lose by faking that than he did by telling the truth, So that emotional response, I always look for that. Because if there's not that, sometimes I'm just like, okay, then why was that not a big deal for you? Have you seen these before? Or, are you used to seeing them or what,
Right, and you can also tell a lot about, I guess, the body language.
Mm-hmm. Like even when someone's lip, when it quivers, when they're crying, it's just like, it's hard to fake that. There are people who are going to get emotional and they're not telling the truth, but it's just interesting to see that emotional component. These are people. This guy was a huge guy, and people didn't mess with him. Someone's 6'10", you kind of leave him alone, and kind of a tough guy. And these other, hunters and miners, Oregon has got some really tough folks. They've lived off the land, and the mining and the logging. You got some tough folks, and to get them jittery, it's something major that they saw, and when miners or loggers would see it, they they didn't know what the heck. Well, this was before there was cable news and newspapers out there,
Yeah, 24/7 information cycle. Now it's a lot easier, but you run into the whole thing we talked about earlier. People can't actually fake these, but you can't fake an emotion. Not something so dramatic. So let's go back something, because if you're in the woods, long before you see one, you're going to hear one or you're going to smell one, right?
Yeah, if I smelled one, I know way ahead of time, whoa, there's something in the area, So that's what a lot of people say, is like they'll smell it first before they ever see anything. Exactly.
Right, because then there's tree knocking, there's shrieks or howls, and there's also, they're known to throw rocks or some sort of anything from the woods. I guess it's like a warning system, like, hey, you're stepping in my property, time to get out of here, right?
Right. And it's like, if you look at it, if the Sasquatch is basically another type of great ape, you've got gorillas, you've got chimps, bonobos, human beings. There's like 8 in the orangutans. There's 8 members of the great apes, just looking from biologically classifying animals. And if this thing is a primate, basically it'd be the 9th great ape. In addition, there's probably multiple species of these things. I know we'll get into that, like you said, but yeah, if it is a great ape, there's information that correlates with like gorillas. They'll do the way they do bluff charges. And I've heard too in a recording that someone had made, that there was like a chest slapping, just like a gorilla would do. And I was like, whoa. And then they'll make nests, like when they sleep, they'll make nests out of sticks and plant matter and everything. And so these are all things, chimps do that, gorillas do that. They have bluff charges, like you're saying, they'll throw, the Sasquatch will throw rocks or logs or, any, like you said, anything they can get their hand on. When you start getting those warnings, it's pretty, I think it'd be pretty well advised to like take them seriously,
Right. And then with these encounters, and when somebody actually physically sees something, what is it about the creature? Is it something did he get lost? Was he curious?
Yeah, they're really known for being curious. In the book, I talk about how I heard some knocks just almost in my campsite. On one occasion, I was with a friend, but he had already fell asleep. We were both in hammocks. And then another occasion, I heard them myself. It was just me. And yeah, when you hear that at night, it gets your attention, and it's like, what am I gonna do? I can't I'm not gonna run down the trail in the dark 1.5 miles back to where I started and get in the car and get out of there. I guess if I was really afraid, I could do that. But if the most scared I've ever been was the first time I heard a tree knock. That was about 2:30 in the morning on Squaw Mountain, and my heart was like, it just like went from my chest, and it felt like it went up to my throat. And I was like, when I heard there were 3 thuds that this thing made on this tree, probably about 25 yards away. I was there. I was up in the middle of nowhere, and to hear that, And it's just like, holy mackerel, it's here. That was the first time I'd ever heard a knock. It really scared me, but I didn't give up. I kept going in the woods, and I got used to hearing stuff like that. So that was a positive. But it affected me. I mean, that's the most scared I've ever been. I'm admitting it. I'm not the toughest guy in the world, but
Yeah, but you still continue for the search, and it's good to be
absolutely.
afraid. That way, you don't do anything stupid while you're out there. Yeah.
That's true. It was funny. This one guy was asking me when I was giving a presentation a couple months ago. He's like, "Well, did you have a gun?" I said, "No." I said, "I had a K-bar knife, but I guess that's probably not going to do too much damage, is it?" So basically, when I go in, I mean, I'm respectful of them, but I also, I know that I don't want to pose any threat to them, but they will come right into your campsite. If you're in the right spot, and you stay up all night and listen, these things have no hesitation. They can see at night. They have the upper hand, and they generally can tell too if people have guns. They'll hear them, or if someone's got a gun, that changes the situation. So I just tried to go in those times before I left Oregon and just be no threat, and just let them come up to me, and that's what they did. I heard them. I never saw one, but I heard them. So I wasn't ready to see one at that point, I don't think, Diego.
Because I think even if you're a paranormal investigator, a Sasquatch researcher, or anything, that the minute something shows up, it's one of those you're gonna get scared no matter what.
Yeah.
But I think it's something you'll get accustomed to, but not quite comfortable, because they're still like, oh my God, is it gonna do me harm, or what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on, because they're so, you talk about, the males, they can be 8 foot tall or taller, 5 feet across the chest, 19-inch tract, it's 8 to 9 inches wide, and upwards of 800 pounds. It's like these things are probably stronger, even a lot stronger, even than just gorillas, and gorillas are just unbelievably strong in terms of, if they were to try and bench press, I mean, they're much stronger than human beings. They could far out bench press a person. These Sasquatch, an 8 foot Sasquatch, is going to be even stronger than a gorilla.
What is it about this subject that's still captivating us for thousands of years? Because this is not just something that's here in the United States.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they've seen them in different parts of the world, and I think probably they're similar species, but they've probably I'm guessing that they're like, like the abominable snowman, and you hear about that in the Himalayas, and that's one type of hominoid creature, and then the Sasquatch in the Northwest, and then the Yeren in China, and in the mountains of China. The other thing too is really cool is, like, there are these habitats that seem to be attractive that the Sasquatch thrive in. Like the Pacific Northwest is forested, and at many places it's very steep. Well, these things, I mean, can go up. I mean, steepness is not a problem going up or down for these things, and it's the same thing like Hubei, China, the Hubei province in China, where they see what they call the Yeren. It looks a lot like the Pacific Northwest, very steep, very forested, or not. A lot of people don't go back in some of those areas. And then you got also, like the Caucasus Mountains, and near Russia and everything. So it's just interesting that there are just these commonalities, even if they're different species, like the abominable snowman or the Yeren or the Yowie or the Sasquatch. They're more similar than they are different, So, and each one of them has their own history and lore,
So is one of those things you think that maybe they're more attracted to those areas because of the food supply is better for them?
Food supply, plus, I mean, that's the interesting thing about, like, Willamette National Forest. There's so many places that would be so hard to go up and down, but they like the steepness, because people don't, we're just not as good going up in very steep areas. But you're right that, in those more remote areas where they're staying away from people, there are plenty of game. They love, like, box canyons, where you have like a small river or a stream or creek coming through an area, and they're able to, basically, if they feel threatened, they can get out of there in different ways. They have different ways they can escape if they sense people coming. So they like areas like that. They like areas that are steep. They like box canyons. They want their own source of water. Hopefully, like if salmon come up, they have the salmon come right up those northwest rivers and streams, and so then and plenty of game, because the game's going to have to come down the game trails at some point drink from this, to get a drink. So yeah, those kinds of areas they love. It's like remote, difficult to get to, lots of game and lots of water.
It's probably the safest area for them anyway. Not that we can physically harm them, with our technology and weapons we could, but I think physically there's nothing we can't even touch them.
No, because my friend Tony Tamburello wrote about the adventures we had together in Oregon, and he took me to this place like in the mid '90s. He was in the Coast Range, and he was they had this area called he was looking for the Lost Indian Gold Mine, they call it, because the Native Americans, they found a vein of gold that was right at the surface, and they just chipped this gold out of the rock and go into town and trade. And they never told any of the the settlers or anything or the Oregonians where they were getting this gold from. So Tony was trying, he's for 20 years he tried to find that mine that deposit, like a surface deposit. So I tell you, he went there for 20 years, and in 20 years he only saw people 3 times. So he would get out and he would go up and down the steep areas where no one else would go. And he was going up a steep area one time, and he saw it looked like a staircase, like something had walked up this staircase that was going up, and he got this really creeped out feeling like, hey, it's that skookum feeling. I'm getting out of here. This is crazy, But he saw this was in the Coast Range of Oregon in the mid '90s. He came across a set of tracks in this fresh snow in that area. He had never seen people more than 3 times in 20 years. And so he found these sets of tracks, and he just looked down. He had a machete with him. He looked down. It was about 5:30 in the morning. He looked down. He said, this machete would do nothing. So he saw these tracks of an adult, and then he went further, and then there was a tracks of a smaller Sasquatch, like a juvenile. And then Diego, they both turned and went down this steep angle, probably like 300 feet down. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd have to go down on my belly, handhold after handhold to get down this thing. But they walked down it just like going down a staircase. It was no problem for them.
That's amazing. That's a lot of strength, and that's a lot of skills. I mean, that's what they do. And let me ask you this, because when I was over at the annual Virginia Squatch Fest a couple weeks ago, over at Wayer's Cave in Virginia, they had a lot of speakers. There's one speaker, which I don't recall that individual's name, but he seems to subscribe to the belief, unless I misunderstood him, that the way they appear and disappear, not just like they're vanishing, but it's some sort of through a cave system that perhaps is why we can't see them, or some sort of interdimensional gate.
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out, because I mean, you read a whole, you do your research, you read all these different accounts, and I mean, sometimes there are other paranormal events as well. A lot of times people will see Sasquatches and they'll see these white lights nearby, or sometimes there've been, government helicopters that have been in an area that are focusing on an area, or even, UFO type craft that would that show up around these creatures. So it gets if they're not like a great ape, I mean, they're from some other dimension or some other star system, extraterrestrial, or are they some sort of spiritual creature? I mean, it gets really hard to figure out really fast. And I just look at it from a scientific point of view. I studied biology in college, and I look at it that way. But that theory doesn't explain all the things, like, oh, this is the 9th grade ape. But saying that doesn't explain a lot of the stuff that happens. There was a Navy SEAL on the Coast Range who was hunting with a friend, and this Sasquatch came out into this opening, and he took his gun and had a sight on it, and he said it just disappeared. So it's like that. It's like, how do you describe that? I mean, gorillas, chimps, humans. I mean, the last time I checked, we don't just disappear and materialize and dematerialize. So it makes it really hard to figure out. And a lot of people have seen that, what you're talking about, where they just like disappear.
Or maybe some sort of natural stealth technology, most like where you have some lizards that can blend into trees or change colors, or because you also have amphibians, like those little frogs in South America that can just blend in very well. You don't even know they're there.
Oh yeah. Which
was kind of interesting, because I know there's some that do the whole Bigfoot alien connection, but I don't know. Who's to say, it doesn't matter what I believe, but I don't think there's a real connection extraterrestrial wise.
Hmm.
I just think that maybe there's something more supernatural to them than extraterrestrial, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's really the Native Americans up there. They really don't want to talk about it too much, which is interesting in and of itself. And so they, I think if I had a chance to really sit down and talk to some Native Americans in the Northwest or wherever, in Canada, or the native indigenous folks in like in Indonesia, where they've had other walking hominid type species. So I don't think the Native Americans would be surprised at that. They believe in things like the ability of certain creatures to shapeshift, and it's just so fascinating. I mean, people we're not just physical creatures; we're spiritual. And the Native Americans look at the Sasquatch the same way. Yeah, they're physical, but also these are like spiritual beings. And I'd really have to sit down and so it's just it's above me, beyond me. I don't know how to, I'd have to really sit down and learn from a Native American who was wanted really to really tell what's really going on, that how they understand it. Because if you look at just Western science, it just doesn't describe everything that happens, and it gets really complex and confusing really fast.
Yeah, and I think there's, at least in this country, because I think outside of this, outside of the United States, I think people are more open to alternate theories or experiences that the United States is not, because we're not a very I want to say more secularized than anything, because I think we're getting away from more spirituality, more of a secular thing,
Hmm.
and anything that falls into the realm of either religious, supernatural, or anything like that, I think people just shy away from it because they don't really want to be bothered by that until they see it face to face.
That's right.
Interesting. So let me, before I continue with my questions, I have a couple of listener questions that I'd like to throw at you, because sometimes I flub over my words because I got so much to say, and I want to know all I can before we end the show, but we still got a while. And let me throw a couple of questions from our listeners. One comes from D from Fredericksburg, Virginia, and she asks, why do they have so many names, they being Bigfoot, in different locations? As there's Grassman, the Yeti, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and also, the skunk ape is another name. Do they share the same DNA? Yeah. Is there some sort of relation? Are they this? Basically, I'll expand on it. Are they the same type of creature, or are these just separate beings altogether?
That is a great question. If we look at them just as these are different types of great apes, and I'm not saying it, I'm not even talking about being a great ape and being primitive. It's just like an animal, like a gorilla. It's like they're all of them are very smart. They know how to get along in their habitat. But the fact that you have all these different names in these different places, yes, I would say that all of them, if these are undiscovered primates, all of them are going to share similar DNA. They're going to share DNA similar to chimps. They're going to have DNA similar to human beings. So, but I think what happens is, I think over time, as these things got in different areas, and they all kind of adapted to where the remote areas and that they lived in. So the Yeti, that there's definitely something going on with the Yetis, because the Sherpas and other indigenous folks have known about that for a long time. And the Yeti, I think, it's not going to be exactly the same as a Sasquatch. And then the skunk ape, they're let's say you're talking about like Arkansas or Texas, and in these swampy areas where people see these skunk apes. Generally, they don't tend to be as big as some of the ones you'll find in the Northwest. So are these different species or subspecies? I would think that they're probably different species. I bet the Sasquatch and the Yeti definitely would share genetic info similarities, but I think they're different enough where you could say, yeah, these are probably a different species. And same thing with the skunk ape, that they're a little bit different. And the grass man is the grass man, they tend to be, a lot of time people have reported them, and they're smaller than the Northwest Sasquatch. So, but the grass man could also be, the grass man is supposed to live in the southeastern Ohio area. And I was out there just a couple months ago doing an expedition for in terms of the grass man finding, see what we could find out there. But the grassman may too just be a Sasquatch that's been able to migrate, through Canada and down through the mountains, and get to, southeastern Ohio. And so is it a separate species? I don't know, but really, you'd have to have the DNA of all these different organisms and compare them. I think they're gonna be really super similar, the DNA.
Terrific. Thank you for answering that question. And I have a second question. This one comes from a good friend, Zach, from Leland, North Carolina. He's also the owner of Hyper Punch Heat Hot Sauce. That's an unsolicited plug for his hot sauces. Probably the best things I've ever had. So we could talk about that another day. Zach asks you, what do you think the population is in the U.S. for Bigfoot? It's like a three-part question. Also, what state has had the most sightings of Bigfoot? And three, what keeps them in hiding? How they, I'll expand on that as well as how are they so successful in avoiding detection?
Okay, so in terms of the population, I would say probably. I mean, I let's say they're great apes. They're very similar to us. They've got to have a population big enough where they can reproduce. They seem to have, from all accounts, they have family groups. Where basically they'll raise a couple juveniles, they become adults, and then they find their own family, just like the gorillas do. So how many are here? Well, a lot of people say in North America maybe 2,000 to 3,000. Some people would say, "Whoa, that's a lot," and other people would say, "Whoa, that's not very many." But it seems like if you go to the right places, I mean, you're going to hear them. You're going to, if you're really fortunate, you'll see them. But the population, it kind of ties into that other part of the question is like, how have they been so successful? We're talking about thousands of these things all going undetected, but a lot of people say 2,000 to 3,000 in North America, and that would include Canada as well. So it sounds reasonable to me, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're definitely much rarer than, say, like a black bear or wolves. But and then where are the most sightings? Well, far and away, like the most sightings have occurred in Washington State. Washington is just like Oregon. It's huge. They got huge, national forest there. But Washington State is the state that has the place where the most Bigfoots have been seen in the U.S. Basically, the majority, the highest numbers of sightings are going to come from Washington, Oregon, Northern California, British Columbia. There's even some in Alaska, and then you can go inland to Montana and Idaho in terms of the Sasquatch. But they've been super successful because they're really smart. I think their senses, their ability to navigate areas we can't go to, their senses, they can see at night, when we can't really see that well. So there's been a lot of reasons why they're successful. They look out for each other. They'll have these family groups, and a lot of people say that they'll have like a kind of like a sentry, like one of the Sasquatches or a couple will watch, be like on guard if any people are coming by or any disturbance. So they kind of have complex family units. You gotta have enough of these so that that you have a population of them. And Washington State is the hotbed, and they just know they come out. They can see at night. They come out at night. They hunt at night. I mean, these things can hunt at night. We can't. You humans very rarely are going to hunt at night. So I mean, they can see well enough where the times I've seen the most activity at night is around somewhere between 2 and 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. So I mean, at that point, they're wide awake. They've been hunting. They're so fast as well. How they've been able to be successful. Well, they can run down game. It just sounds incredible, but you or I would have to have a bow or a gun, but these things can actually run down deer. I mean, they're supposed to be just incredibly fast. They can run a lot, faster and farther than we can. They're incredible. I mean, like there's talks of them, in one night they can go, 20 miles, up and down these ridges, and it's like we'd be lucky to go half a mile in one night. Yes. So they've got a lot of built-in like hardware and software that they've just been able to elude people. And it is strange, all these sightings, and they've still been able to elude people. So I can't explain that. Why with all these sightings they haven't had a conclusive proof. It depends on who you're talking to. I know the government knows more than we know about it. I think they could easily say, okay, yeah, we've got bodies, we've got DNA samples, but your average person out there, there's no comparison between what they can do out there and what we can do.
Right. And speaking of that, do you think that this year has been a very interesting year as far as what information has been released? There's been a lot of soft disclosure This becomes with the extraterrestrial and UFO on that subject. And because there's been more and more things coming out to where finally people are saying, yeah, this is real, but it might take some time to permeate and really sink into people's brains. Yeah, we're kind of ready for it. And if it was disclosed, yeah, big deal, so what? But I think Bigfoot might be a little bit different because I think it would challenge people as to the origins of mankind. Maybe they might not be too ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I mean, it would be if a Bigfoot was brought to science, or let's say like a jawbone or a cranium or a leg bone and foot bone, whatever had was brought to teeth, were brought to the attention of science. It would and proven that these things are out there now. I mean, it would be the biggest anthropological discovery of the 21st century. And if it had been found conclusively by scientists in the 20th century, that would have been the biggest anthropological discovery of the 20th century. So I mean, it's huge. I mean, it would change people's. I think I mean, I'm a Christian, and I look at things through that perspective. It hasn't escaped me the fact that a lot of people would probably say, okay, this is the link, this is the missing link. We're just a bunch of we're just hairless gorillas running around, and there's no sense to anything. And I mean, and the same thing. Oh my gosh, when you talk about the UFO, I mean, I used to be with the UFO situation. It used to really freak me out, but over time, it's like it doesn't do that anymore, and I think that's good. So who knows? I was curious, Diego, what the timing on these UFOs? Why is the government talking about it out of the blue now when these sightings have been going on for decades? Why are they talking about it now?
It's hard to say. I think because it's hard to cover up things where more and more people are seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be something similar. It might not be in our lifetime. Hopefully it is, to where more and more non-hoax encounters are found or evidence to where I think we'll all start warming up to the idea that there is something else out there other than humans. That's, in my belief, they're far more superior than us physically. I mean, other than our technology and our way of language, I mean, they're far more superior than us.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they've avoided detection for thousands and thousands of years. We can't avoid detection at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
We bust a window of somebody's house. The cops are in our house 5 minutes from there saying, "We just saw you do this."
Yeah, really.
So, well, let's expand on that. So, let's talk about your book. Well, if you go on Amazon, which is what I did today, and I shared the link on my social media. So, I am at co-host_Diego. Now, on mine at co-host_Diego, I put a link to the Amazon for the book, Off the Beaten Path: My Search for Sasquatch and Self. The author tonight, Curt Bradford. So let's talk about your book. A very interesting subject. So I'm deep into the book now, and I'm not going to reveal anything. I want people to go out there and purchase it and read it for themselves, and they can judge for themselves. Where did you find the time? Because from your journey to the West to all the work that you do, where did you find the time, and what gave you the write my experiences down in a book? I mean, it's a very interesting read so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so passionate about this subject. I mean, I will talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere. I mean, it's so fascinating to me. I mean, it's just like God has given me this passion for this critter, and it's just fascinating. But the book, I said My Search for Sasquatch and Self. I studied biology and psychology in college, and the biological part in terms of a cryptid or a cryptozoological species, it just means that it's a hidden animal. It's an animal that's not been cataloged by science or discovered by science. So that's the search for the Sasquatch, the biology, this interesting species. And then myself, I talked some about, I don't know why, Diego, I have such a passion about it. And I've often thought about that. It's like, why do I care so much to think about these things? What is it, And so when I say, I'm also looking for myself, and I had some very challenging times in my life. And, it all kind of, when I had this window to go out there, I really looked inside myself and I said, okay, I've got to do this. But so then I came back in 2007. I didn't start writing this book until 2019. So it took me a couple years to write it. And I went through it. It was edited many times, and had to get a lot of color photos together that I had taken. And there's also photos that I had to buy copyright to put in there. On the back cover of the book, there's an artist in Alaska who went in and he added detail to the Patterson-Gimlin film there's that one slide. I'm trying to remember which frame it was, 357 or something, the most famous Bigfoot picture probably in the world. And so
Yes.
that female Sasquatch, he went in and he just put some detail in it. And when I looked at what he did, a lot of times the Sasquatch have like just dark eyes. There's no whites to the eyes, a lot of people say. And so when he went in and did that, he didn't put the whites of the eyes in there. And I know it's something maybe that sounds small, but the other photo that people had, this same photo frame or film frame that people had talked about, it's like it just was never right to me. It's like this doesn't seem right the way they did the eyes. He got the eyes right. They're dark, and and I had to spend like a few $100s to get copyright on that. So it was just a story that I had to tell. I mean, a lot of it is about my life. It's just kind of an inward look at things. That was the psychology part of it. It's kind of like here's the psychological angle in terms of describing what I went through to get out there and to go into the woods, and basically my thoughts, and my feelings and emotions. So I kind of open up in the book, but before I had gone out there, it just like to the Northwest, I had all these challenges that were just building up, and I had to face my fear. I was always afraid of the Bigfoot, and at the end of the book, I'd go into it's like, I finally faced down my fear. And it was just a story that I had to tell. I still remember it. That's how I didn't even have to do any research for the book, really. I mean, just a little bit, but it was so burned into my mind. I'll never forget what my adventures out there. And so it's really talking about half of it's kind of autobiographical and the other half is kind of Bigfoot. So
Yes. So with the book and when it was released, how has the book been received among, I'll use the generic term, Bigfoot community? Because
I think the Bigfoot community is like when we were at this last where we met at the last conference out there in Wires Cave. I mean, I was hearing people come up and saying, "Hey, yeah, I heard about your book," and they didn't know me and I didn't know them, so it's starting to get more familiarized. I don't know the players in the Bigfoot community in the East like I did in the West, but here, my first contact, well, a couple contacts, Dan Benoit and Mike Singleton. So I've gotten to meet a couple of these people, and then you and I got to meet. So it's really interesting. I'm like starting all over from scratch. Just what I did in Oregon, I had to learn all the people who were involved in it. Now back here, I'm learning all the people that are involved in it and trying to learn from them. So it's just like Oregon all over again, starting from scratch,
yes, because I'll tell you, because unfortunately I'm on Twitter a lot, which is great because I get to do a lot of research, get to contact people. And I've seen this also with the UFO Twitter, where, well, I know more than you, or you can't be real because this, and that. So there's been no feedback like that or pushback from any of the other experts in this field.
Oh, in terms of the book?
Yes, or your research.
Oh, pushback on it? Well, I graduated from William and Mary, and so I can guarantee you that most of the professors in the biology department would kind of laugh at this book, But the thing is, it's like this book, I mean, I'm kind of your average Joe. I mean, yeah, I studied biology, which helped, but I mean, these scientists should really be out there doing what I'm doing. I mean, they're the ones who they haven't looked at all the data, they haven't looked at all the evidence, and it's the DNA evidence, the footprint evidence, the hair samples that are unique, the dermal ridges on the Sasquatch foot, which are definitely not human, that have been detected by people like Jeff Meldrum. So Jeff Meldrum, PhD, Idaho State University, the guy is extremely smart. I took some time to read over some of his scientific papers, and he's just talked about all kinds of things. He's a professor of anatomy, and he specialized in primate locomotion, how primates walk. So, I mean, he's the exception though, Diego, because it's like all these other scientists, I'm going to say, hey, look at all the stuff that's been accumulated. You guys should be out in the field, And there've been a few primatologists that come out to the field and everything, but, the fact that these people look at it and laugh at it in a way is good for me because it opens up a whole world where I can be an amateur scientist and go do what they're supposed to be doing, So it really opens up. There's a scientific void in there where I could just jump in there and say, okay, I'm going to find out what I can,
Right. And so when you gather evidence, you find actual hair samples, or it could be a bones or something. So it's been known that during the years when people discover, let's say, bones of giants or bones of something that's unknown, they wind up in a certain museum's eyes or purview, and it gets brought to them the evidence, but you never see the evidence back again. It's like they take it and they just hide it away. I don't want to mention that museum because it's it's very well known, and I don't want people knocking on my door saying, "Well, why are you talking about us?" But it seems that during the years of when there's been a lot of discovery, this certain museum chain, they get the evidence, take it with them. Nobody ever sees it again. Is that part of? Is there sort of not a conspiracy, but some sort of group that does not want this out?
Yeah, that's a good question, Diego. I actually, you won't believe this. So basically, where I was having these run-ins with Sasquatch was the different Sasquatches was in is an area. It was an area close to Opal Creek. So it's an old growth forest. I'm trying to remember how big it is. I don't know if it was like 20,000 acres, but it had the big Douglas firs that were 400 years old, Western cedars that are like 800 to 1,000 years old. And so, that was the area I was in, and then there was the little Sandy M River that flows through there, and specifically at Sawmill Falls was where I had the bulk of my encounters. Now, the sad thing is, on my book cover, there's a picture of an old growth forest with a path going through it. So, I'm off the beaten path. I'm not walking downtown Portland. I'm going on this path that other people aren't going on, and so that area, I mean, it was every year I would go back. I would do one expedition a year. I'd come back in the summer. For years, I've been doing this. And after I left Oregon, I go back. And last August, there was a tremendous forest fire that went through that old growth valley and just burnt everything out. And it's like, I mean, it was literally and I have some pictures in the book of how beautiful that area was. But it was one of the most beautiful places in the world, and a lot of people didn't know about it, and a lot of people were happy they didn't know about it. But anyway, and so in that same area, I found there was a campsite there, and I found some hair. So I had a couple different hair samples close to where my camp was, and so I had there were two types of hairs. They were different, so I kind of tried to separate them. I gave a hair sample to the FBI through a special agent or former special agent that I'm an acquaintance with. And so he took it to the FBI lab and said, well, in their spare time, maybe someone can look at it. Well, and I'm not sure his name. I apologize. One of the hair experts was really is one of the top guys in the world in terms of hair identification. I mean, the FBI lab has some real bright spots, and he was just brilliant. He knew so much. So the first sample came back, and they said, well, this is a dog. And I could see that, campers that would come through there have their dog there. But the second sample that was different hair, this former FBI agent was saying, okay, Curt, hey, if you ever have another sample, just let me know and I can take it. So I gave him the second sample, and so I sent that off. That was sent to the FBI lab as well. And guess what? I never heard back on that. And I asked like probably a dozen times. It's like, hey, can I have my hair sample back? And I mean, I don't want to. I'm not trying to, bust on the FBI. I mean, there's a lot of great people that work there, and they know a lot of stuff that that you and I don't know. But it was just kind of like, I was like, you're kidding me, right? But it didn't surprise me on another level. It didn't surprise me. So, it was very, very interesting. I did send a hair sample to Jeff Meldrum too in Idaho State University. And I think he still has that. He doesn't have funding to do like DNA analysis. So I just didn't, it would have been something like $1,000 to do the DNA analysis. And I just said, well, even if they do it, it's not going to be conclusive because there's also other hairs that has DNA that they can't identify. So yeah, so the FBI has those hair samples somewhere in their labs, and filed away. I don't know what they did with it.
So once you receive the results from the non-government side, and I would hope we'll have the exclusive of what it is that they think it is.
Exactly.
Now that would be great. So this book is a great book. I really suggest folks, and I know I said on Amazon, but where else can they find this book?
It's on barnesandnoble.com. Any bookstore can order it for folks. Most people will be getting on Amazon because you can get it at a discount rate there. The advantage when I go to some of the conventions or the festivals is that I can sign it for folks right there. So we just usually it was going at the festival we were selling it for about $15, and then I would sign them. But online, I think on Amazon you can get them, I think for 14. I think the retail was like 17.95, but on Amazon you can get them for like 14, and if you're a Prime member, they'll ship it for free. So Amazon's probably the best, but if you go on like Walmart.com, Target.com, they all have access to the book and can get folks copies. But Amazon seems to be good. And and for your listeners too, I mean, if they read it and enjoy it, I really urge people to do a review on Amazon. I've gotten a number of I've got 20 different reviews so far, and I think the book it's got like a 4.8 out of 5 stars. So people have really liked it. I mean, this book can be read by kids. There's a third grader that I know who just couldn't put the book down and loved it, and then there's senior citizens that have read it, and so everyone gets something out of it. I talk about a lot of different stuff. It's like a crab cake. I don't put the filler in there. I give you all the best, the lump crab meat, just give you the best information that I took years for me to find and put it in there and just send it out to the public. It's like, hey, I hope you really get something from this, because it's my life and it's a huge scientific topic, and it's very, very interesting.
That it is, and for the folks that choose to order it, so unless the next convention comes in town, I really urge you to get to meet Curt and get that book autographed, just as I did. As I said earlier, that's the first book I've ever had autographed by an author, and I'm really stoked about it, to tell you the truth. But I'm eagerly awaiting another book coming out.
Absolutely.
Is there a possibility? Are you working on something now, or?
Yeah, I'm working on something now. I've also wanted to do like a kids book for the Sasquatch, and it's just funny. If you look at like the top selling books in the country, like half of them almost are kids books. Because parents want to get their kids reading and everything, and if there's a good kids book, thousands and thousands of parents will buy them. And so I've thought about doing like a kids book, but really I think the reaction what I'm getting back feedback from people is they want another Bigfoot book. And I'm the second book that I would do. I've putting some information on it is going to be very different than the first one. It's going to have a lot more interesting information that I never even talked about in the first one.
Can't wait for that to happen. So what's the? And I know it's just guesswork. What's the timetable? That a couple of years from now, or?
Yeah, probably 2 years. But I mean, if I got serious at it, and I mean, it would be wonderful. If I could do this full time, and that would be just great. But I kind of have to do it in my spare time. So I'd say to a year to 2 years, hopefully. I mean, maybe under than a year. I mean, if people really demand enough of it, it's like, okay, I get the message. I'll write a second one, and try and make it just as good or better than the first.
Tremendous, man. I can't wait for it. So other than your books, what would be some Bigfoot required reading for some who are just getting involved in research in this subject?
Okay, so in terms of like, let's say like people that have like the scientific background, I really recommend Jeff Meldrum's book. It's called, what was it, like Sasquatch Where Legend Meets Science, I believe is the title. And it's probably the most comprehensive book in terms of pulling all kinds of things together, scientific wise, sightings, scientific explanation. And it's just, his book Jeff Meldrum is extremely smart. I'm just so impressed. If you look at his scientific papers, he tackles these big issues, and it's like, big questions in science. He just goes after it. So that would be, if you've got kind of like are curious about the science of it, Sasquatch, where legend meets science would be my recommendation. But some of the older books too, like I said, books like written by John Green. There's a really awesome story about John Green in the book, and I think people, it's really funny, but it was the highlight of a cross country trip trying to find John Green. So I would recommend John Green, because he really wrote the books that kind of were definitive and really put Bigfoot on the map. There are other authors, but I mean, John Green, I would say either Jeff Meldrum or John Green, but there's so many books out there. There's a lot of books out there, but those two kind of jump at me.
Yeah, because I read a few, but this one has a little different feel to it, the way it begins and then where it goes to. But,
yeah, I think it's pretty unique. I don't think anyone has written a Bigfoot book exactly this way. Maybe some a little bit similar, but I think it's kind of unique the way it goes at the Bigfoot issue. So that's the see, that's like the question, like on a second book is like, okay, I'm trying to figure out what angle I'm coming from, so that, there's just so much research that goes on by folks trying to pull it all together and make sense of it. Is like, it takes some time, and I'll probably have to do some more research that I didn't really have to do on the first book.
For my final question before we close, if anyone encounters or has an experience with a Bigfoot or what they think it is, I think it's a mistake to contact media or any journalist and tell your story. What would be the best step for someone to say, hey, I saw something, I need to report this? Other than the media, who would be or let's say law enforcement, what's their best bet? Who would they report this to?
Well, they could always report it to me. I mean, if people give me information or evidence, I keep that, I respect people's privacy and keep that confidential. So, my email address for anyone who wants to email me is Curt, and then M like Mike, Bradford. So curtmbradford@gmail.com. That I would just, and I can get people in touch with, maybe some other folks as well. But if they want to email me, I keep that in confidence and can basically let them know, who they need to talk to. I know the Bigfoot Research Organization is like big out west. They've taken a lot of people like Tom Powell. I love Tom Powell. He wrote one of the best books, one of the best written books I've ever read. His name is Tom, Thom, and then Powell, Powell. He wrote a book called The Locals. Diego, I mean, his book is just, it is off the chart. So, I mean, I could link people up with him or other folks, but yeah, if someone wants to share something with me, I regard that in confidence, and I can give them a feedback, and it's like, listen to them and say, hey, first tell them. And I've told people this before, you're not crazy. In fact, you're very fortunate that you saw this, that most people never see in their lives. Even people who spend their whole time looking have never seen. So, you're fortunate in a way. Just get it off your chest, get it to me, and I'll do what I can to get you linked up with the right folks.
Awesome. If any of the listeners out there has any stories or any encounters, if you can't get a hold of Curt, send us your story, send us your information. I will forward it to him, get it into the right hands so you can get some real answers.
Absolutely.
And so we'll talk about that. And in final, we talk about, I never search to see if you have any social media or not. Are you on social media? Because I know sometimes some people don't really get into that.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. So, if you just put in Curt Bradford in Facebook. Also, there's it's kind of cool. Some of the viewers or listeners would like it. On YouTube, I have a mini movie. It's only like 2.5 minutes, but it's a new research area in Northeast Oregon that's super remote. And so, if they want to see that video, if you go to youtube.com and just put in Curt Bradford, it'll pull it up. I think people will really, I can tell you how beautiful it is out there, but the pictures say 1,000 words, and I think people will really appreciate some of that area in that video that was made. So that's something else that people can check out.
Awesome, man. And I did see that. It's pretty nice. It's very short, but it's well worth your viewing. And Curt, I appreciate you being on the show, and I can't wait to release this episode. And if you can, maybe sometime next year, come on back and let us know what's going on in the world of Bigfoot.
Yeah, that'll motivate me to have that book ready for you.
I would hope so. I'll be the first in line for that autograph, my friend.
Awesome. One
One more time, the author of the book, Curt Bradford, he is our guest tonight. The book, Off the Beaten Path, My Search for Sasquatch and Self, a very different book from most Sasquatch and Bigfoot books. Get it on Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or contact Curt, and he'll tell you how to get that. Curt, I know there's much more to talk about, which we'll probably do after the show. Thank you for being on, and we'll get you back on next year, and I know there's going to be a lot more stories, because I shared with you some stories before the show, so I think hopefully we can cover some of that next time.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for being on.
Thank you for listening to Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Pocket Casts, and on Anchor. For more information about Let's Find Out with co-host Diego, please visit us on Facebook.com/co-host Diego, on Twitter at co-host_Diego, and on Instagram as co-host Diego. Copyright co-host Diego. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.